Waiting. Okay. The meeting of the Santa Clara Valley Open Space Authority Board of Directors is now called to order at 6:30 p.m. Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Director Kenneth.
Here.
Director Flaher.
Here.
Director Chapman is not present. Director Annabelle.
Present.
Director Alexander.
Present.
Director Potter.
Here.
Director Gill.
Thank you. At this time, any members of the public will have an opportunity to address the board on any item not on the agenda. Speakers will be limited to 3 minutes. Do we have anyone who would like to speak? Okay, thank you. Next is approval of the minutes. We have 2 sets of minutes. I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of June 22nd, 2023.
I'll move to approve those minutes.
Thank you. Does the board have any questions? Are there any members of the public who want to comment? Could we please call the vote?
Director Kenneth.
Yes.
Director Flaher.
Yes.
Director Annabelle.
Yes.
Director Alexander.
Yes.
Director Potter.
Yes.
Director Gill.
Yes.
Thank you. That passed. I will now entertain a motion to approve the minutes of July 20th, 2023. I have a motion. Do I have a second? I'll second. Thank you. Does the board have any questions? Are there any members of the public who wish to comment? Could we please call the vote?
Can you repeat who made the motion? Oh, Director Gill. Okay, thank you. Okay, Director Kenneth.
Yes.
Director Flaher.
Yes.
Director Annabelle.
Yes.
Director Alexander.
Yes.
Director Potter.
Yes.
Director Gill.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. The motion passed. Now we're moving on to approval of consent items. Are there any changes to the consent calendar?
Move approval of the consent calendar.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Could we please call the vote?
Can you please repeat the mover and the second?
Director Kenneth?
Director Kenneth.
Yes.
Director Flaher.
Yes.
Director Annabelle.
Yes.
Director Alexander.
Yes.
Director Potter.
Yes.
Director Gill.
Yes.
Okay, that passed. Now we'll move on to new business. Members of the public will have the opportunity to comment on any matter on the agenda. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes. The first item is feedback on the Urban Grant Program 2022-2023, and that's Jackie Latham.
Good evening, directors. Nice to see you again. It's been a few weeks. I'm just gonna get my PowerPoint up here. Is that something I should do? Okay, great. I emailed it to Caroline. Great. So since we just had the last cycle, the capital projects were just awarded in July, thought I'd come back while it's still kind of fresh and get some initial feedback. And then we'll be doing surveys with the grantees and the applicants, and then I'll come back again. Megan and I will come back to get more specific feedback when we start to create the next guidelines and look ahead at the next cycle. So today, I'll be going through just a brief overview of the process of the grant program. I'll give an update on the newest awardees and some questions there, and we'll proceed to some feedback for the cycle. So the grant program has been around since 2016, and since then we've awarded 73 grants for 5.6 million now. As you've noticed, that number has gone up with each of these presentations, so that's exciting. And as always, you can find our Urban Success Stories page on our website with lots of information about past grantees. Something that I care a lot about as being a member of the JEDIA staff working group, and I know a lot of you care a lot about, is how the Urban Grant program really connects to our diversity, equity, and inclusivity initiatives. So as I've spoken about before, a lot of nonprofits really struggle right now, especially after the pandemic, with high turnover of staff, difficult to have staff retention. Staff pay is a big issue. And so grants are something that really helps with keeping the sustainability of especially nonprofits, but also the schools and the public agencies that we serve through our program. So that's why in the past, we've done some really great changes, such as lowering match or not requiring match for small organizations, for supporting things like personnel, either directly through the program or by doing indirect costs. And also these nonprofits, public agencies, school districts, they really are on the ground serving our underserved communities most directly through these projects. So in this year, we had the pre-applications due in November. Then the applicants were given 12 to 14 weeks for working on their full applications if they were deemed eligible. The total funding available was 1.5 million, allocated in half for both programs and capital, so $750K for each. And the applicants were local public agencies, schools and school districts, and nonprofits. The 4 project categories are environmental stewardship and restoration, parks, trails, and public access, environmental education, and urban agriculture and food systems. The program area is our jurisdiction, with capital and planning projects needing to happen within the eligible grants area, which is that lighter orange area. So for programs, this was $20,000 to $100,000 for individual projects. This is a 2-year grant period. This had an expedited review, so it did not go to the CAC. And the board awarded 13 projects for approximately $911,000. For capital, these were projects that were to be $40,000 to $250,000 for individual projects. They have a 3-year grant period. The CAC got to review and give recommendations and comments before this went to the board on July 20th, and 6 projects were awarded for $799,000. Those that are awarded have different requirements. Well, they all have similar requirements, but the capital projects also have a signage requirement and a few other things. So we work with them to finalize their contract based on their application. Once that's in place, then they can start working on their project and they are reimbursed for their work. And match is required for large organizations. So this is the list of the May 18th program category awards, the 13 projects that were awarded. And here are the 6 that were awarded for capital and planning. So I wanted to draw your attention to partial funding. Oh, I'm sorry, there's a little bit of a word in the Santa Clara Unified School District, but I hope you can still read it. So this partial funding and grants contracts kind of shows you the difference for the capital awards. As you remember, there was partial funding for almost all of the grants, including some that had quite a big difference between their original request and then their final funding award. So one thing that we would love to get your feedback on is the approval process for these contracts in particular. Typically what happens is after a grantee is awarded, Megan and I work with them to use the information from their application to then make a contract that talks about their scope of work, their goals, and their budget. We work with our legal team to make sure that that all looks good. It takes a little bit of time, and then that goes back to the grantee, and then we go and sign it, and they can go forward and do their work. When there's a significant partial funding, such as 13% difference or 20% difference from their original ask, it can make a challenge for us to make sure that there's still the spirit of the program in this final contract. So something we're hoping for feedback on is, would you like staff to proceed as we typically would, work together with the grantee to make sure that they can have a successful program with this different funding award, and work with our legal team to make sure that that all sounds good? Or is there another thing that you would like us to do, such as coming back to the board with these final proposed contracts or so forth? And we can either talk about that now or at the end when we do final feedback. I'll leave that to Director Alexander.
You mean at the end of your whole presentation?
Yes.
Well, we'll see. Do we have questions or comments right now? I think it would be specifically about the partial grant process and
Yes.
how we want to proceed with that.
And I'm happy to pose the question again if helpful.
No, I guess word will get out that in order to get, you have to ask for 10 and hope to get 7. But that's the way it is. Is your follow-up also to make sure that what we've given them the money for is spent for what we've given them the money for?
Yes. So the question we're looking at is what from their application, their original application, can be then in their new contract. So their budget is obviously going to change, which will affect their goals and their scope of work. So typically the staff would work with them and with our legal team to make sure that that still aligns with the spirit of the project. But in this case, because there are a couple that are significantly different, we kind of want to give the board of directors a heads up that some of these projects might look quite different than what the original application or what the original proposal that you heard when the speaker spoke about their project. It could look quite different. So we're looking for feedback on how you'd like us to proceed with that.
From my perspective, I think you should continue to work with them, and that wherever the portion of funding there we are contributing, that still mirrors what our goals are. We all knew that I think that they need extended time in order to do that. So in working with them, if something was to change, in the spirit of it, because they can twice the time that they did, so keep that money aside.
Yeah, I agree. It's nice to have.
Wait just a minute.
I didn't finish.
Okay.
Oh, right. The occasional report back to the staff, just how it's going. Like when you give a scholarship, you want to make sure it goes to school and towards school and not towards the trip.
Great.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening. I just wanted to frame it a little bit differently. Staff came to me and asked me about this very question about what to do when the board does, significant reduction in the requested funding. In some of these projects, it's going to ultimately change the entire project. It doesn't even necessarily look like what was initially proposed and what you considered improved. And so the problem for staff is that it doesn't really know what to do in that situation since the project is vastly different. And I think if the board is not going to follow the staff recommendation, and if you're only going to grant partial funding, it's not an issue when you decide to give a different grantee than was recommended by staff. In other words, we're going to fully fund this grantee instead of the one recommended by staff. But it's quite another thing when the request was for X dollars and you significantly reduced it and the project changes. So in that scenario, in order to make sure that, because the one concern that I would have is that staff does something that the board isn't happy with, and staff, may be uncomfortable in a particular situation because they don't know exactly what to do. So that if the board does do a partial funding situation in the future, you might consider that the staff come back with you as to what that project looks like before you get final approval. That way the staff has some clarity about what they're doing and they feel secure in following through with the grant, particularly 13% funding in the one scenario. Is that correct? It was 13% of the funding. The project is that in that scenario could be vastly different just because of the lack of available funds. And in that case, what was presented to you and what you thought you gave 13% funding for, there may have been assumptions on the board that, well, they'll backfill the money with other money. So that's the crux of the issue. And so I think it would be really good if in these scenarios, perhaps staff comes back to you. That would be my recommendation. And I'm not suggesting you have to do this, but that staff comes back to you. It might give staff a little bit of peace in terms of how they can move forward, because what you don't want happening is you give staff full discretion, but then you get upset with staff later for doing something that's completely different. If that makes any sense.
So you're suggesting that we would say tentatively, we're funding this, but before we give the final stamp of approval, we want to see a revitalized project.
I think that's probably the best way to do it, unless there's some threshold you want to come up with, like if it's 75 or 80% funding or something like that, and staff feels comfortable in that scenario. But I think this question came up, and please, Megan and Jackie, chime in if I've mischaracterized this at all. But I think this came up because 13% funding, and the project is going to be radically different.
Yeah, thank you through the chair. Candidly, it's exactly that. I think it's those first two where it's so much less. So let's say they came to the board back in the application saying they were going to do A, B, C, and D. We were trying to work out, do you do a little bit of all four of those things? Do we give up on A, B, and C and only do D? Trying to figure out what that scope looks like. And so, yeah, the 80% I'm less concerned about. Often folks can adjust their budget, and we're still within the spirit at the staff level. We are pretty comfortable with just those other two.
So I'm happy to chime in. I wasn't a participant in this year's grant process, but in prior times, I have spoken with the council member for the city of San Jose, and that is a large project. So our portion of the funding is just going to be a smaller piece than what they were hoping for. So it is, and in prior years, in an effort to try to have a broader program, make more work for our staff to monitor more grants, which was an unintended outcome. We wanted to have a smaller piece of pie, but give more pie out. And so that was part of the reason I did that in prior years. For this year's, I don't know, but I do know for that one that it's a huge project. So our portion is going to be a little small, but they're very excited to have our portion. And so for the 20% one, they were thrilled, and they've taking out raises at the district 8 roundtable several days later. So,
And if I may, it could be a scenario where perhaps maybe 13% funding is okay and the project goes forward. They find other funding, the project goes forward as envisioned and as you saw, but maybe it's those projects that substantially change. Maybe there's some substantial change in the original project that was presented to you that at least the staff has the ability to come back to you and you can put your imprimatur on it as to what they want to go forward with.
First of all, I commend you guys for taking this as handling it as well. It's totally more understandable or me at least, than it has been in the past. So based on what you brought up, is, do we ever ask who else they're asking for money and what the I know you mentioned what the total project is. And then do we follow up after we made our decision? Were they able to back this?
So great question through the chair. So oftentimes there is match and there's other costs that go into this larger project. Like I mentioned before with the match, for organizations that have less than $10 million annually, we do not require match. And what we're mostly concerned about in the contract portion and further down the road when they're doing reimbursements is really what's in their specific contract. We're tracking that they're turning in match and that is aligning with their original contract. But in order for them to complete the portion of the project that we are funding, that's really what we're looking at, which sometimes is a smaller slice of the larger project.
Is there things that we can do up front when we're working with them initially that will help us identify early on that one, they're looking for other funding from other sources as well. And two, do it in a way so they don't say, well, maybe we don't want to tell them all what we're doing. And we'd like a bigger slice of that pie. I don't want to get into a point that we're seeing things maneuvered around us as we try to be more flexible. That's not the intent of the meeting. But I'd like some more openness, you know, as like I was saying, that District 8 is just happy as the clam. I mean, we even got a thank you card from the council member, which is interesting. But it seems like we need to do more to try to figure this out up front rather than being on the back end trying to say what can go in.
Through the chair,
Yes,
just to respond. So we do ask upfront all other funding. We ask both what's secured and what's not yet secured. So we do ask about funding that they're searching for. And that's part of what we're looking at, as Jackie mentioned, matches are required, so it's not necessarily part of the scoring depending on the organization. But I'll say the difficulty at the end, though, it almost has to be later that you figure it out because we're judging it based on what they've presented. And so that's the project that we're scoring based on. And let's say they did have a couple other options for unsecured funds that they're still seeking. Speaking of someone who goes for grants ourselves, it's a long time consuming process. So even if they had some ideas of where to go for funding, it could take them a year or two to get that funding. So, you know, we're, I think, better off looking at what they have in hand at the time of the application to make sure the project is viable.
go ahead.
I'd hear from staff, because I kind of agree with everything that Bill has said. So I don't want you to be in the subjective again. And so would it be better for you, for us to say, okay, anytime that you see that we have funded less than 75% or 50%, you bring it back to us before you complete it with the kind of examination that you're talking, rather than saying, well, I don't know, would somebody consider this something that needs to or not need to say, okay, there's a line here. And when you get this line, and then, I know that in looking at the applications, the applicants, as I recall, do reside in there what kind of grants that they're expecting. For instance, the garden one said that they had asked for grants. And that's what the payment said. And so it was at the time it was presented to us, it was favorable, yes. And then subsequently, they were like, that was even yes, we actually had this. We didn't like that. So I don't want to see, I appreciate what staff does. So I'd like to see us giving them those comments,
We have somebody over here.
Okay, I guess what you're describing is, a worst case scenario is we give them too little money. And they continue with their project that looks nothing like what we originally gave money for. What do we do then?
Yes, and through the chair, if I could speak to the example of the 13%, since the 194K was for capital improvements. When reviewing their budget again, the 25,000 would really only cover maybe one person's work or some educational signage. So I do think in the case of the that our city forest project and the city of San Jose, speaking from my experience, it would be helpful to work with the grantee and see what might be realistic and then bring that back to the board of directors so that you know what to expect when 6 months or a year from now, I give you an update on what their project looks like. And you're like, oh, they didn't do any sidewalks. What happened? You know, then you're aware beforehand.
Well, it sounds like, I mean, we've already awarded the money this time. We might do it differently next time. But it sounds like it would be helpful, and I totally understand it for staff, but also for the grantee, for you to go through that with them, because they may also be trying to figure out how to move forward and, you know, how to document what they're doing when they can only do a small percentage of it.
Absolutely, Chair. Absolutely. We always do work with the grantees. That's part of sort of after the award, after the big exciting night. Jackie's great, meets with every single one of them. Sometimes there are slight adjustments between when they applied and now, you know, the cost of steel goes up or whatever, and they have to make some minor adjustments. We work with them on that. So that's a normal part of the process, that we would work with that grantee to make sure, but it's just more where we land to make sure that I think they would feel, like you're saying, they would feel comfortable too, knowing that the board is in agreement with the reduced scope that we end up funding.
So it seems to me that we're gonna have to do this for some of these cases on more than just one night, one item. What we're gonna do. We might be able to award, say, 20%, 20% on the night of. And then based on what you find out working with the grantee, that they might have to come back to us and say, here's what it looks like. It's nothing like what we did. Are you willing to go forward with it? I also remember in years past, we have said that you can come and do it 1 year and then come back the next year to get more to do on that project that you want to do. So the fact that we're thinking about this now is good, because I don't think we've ever had anyone to come back the second year and want more for the same thing. So, but I think that we may have to consider if we're going to split this up into such low percentages, that we're going to have at some point, a month later, 2 months later, a look at it again to see what's possible and what we've granted or potential the grantee who wants to do with it.
Well, if I understood the exhibits that were part of our packet, is that currently between the award time and the end of September is the period at which you're looking at things. So if there were using examples, so if they're like on the 13% or on the 20%, probably it would be December before you're ready to come back. Looking
Through
at
the chair,
between
I think it
now-
could be sooner. Likely, it really depends on the organization, how much staff they have dedicated to this project and the grants. So far, like the team working on Lake Cunningham, the next day was like, we want to start working on our revised scope. What can we do? And so that's kind of why I was like, oh, good question. I don't really know how to proceed with this. So some people are ready to start moving on that. And again, it's easier with those who've reached out that got 20,000 out of 250,000. They already have suggestions, which seem totally reasonable from my staff perspective. So others, it might take a lot longer. We don't have a requirement that they need to start their project by X date necessarily. If it takes a while, we do nudge them and we try to make sure that they're getting their money and that their project is getting started at a reasonable time. But I really think this fall is kind of I could see us coming back to the board, at least with the city of San Jose's updated information, end of September, early October, potentially that early.
And then more time. I have a question, Spot, is that before you have the final seal, the money doesn't go out until they hit certain points.
Oh, good question.
So the question is, do we have a special account that this funds goes over into and sits for the 2.5 years, 15 years? And is that reflected like in our part of our packet that came today? You know, from the
I
county fund?
don't
Or
think
is
it's
that
in today's
someplace
packet.
Once it's allocated, it's over there and it's out of the window. We don't have a budget. We don't have a budget.
Not in,
You don't know what my,
through the chair, not in tonight's item. Tonight's item is monthly check register, but that's a list of all the checks we've written.
Okay.
But that one would be in our quarterly. The board would get a balance of how much we set aside for each grantee.
Okay.
And it resides on our balance sheet as a liability.
But it still sits in the pot. So it's
Yeah.
that, like, for instance, our Q money is 13 million. We're gonna take money off of that now for your September that says, okay, we've allocated that there, so you don't have it to spend.
So not in that check register, but on our balance sheet, it would reflect, so, yeah, that it's been set aside and allocated.
I did see a check in the check registry for like the Bike Coalition, which is a grant from prior years, so we do pay them out of the checking account. This is the first time, if I remember, that we've done programming and capital, right?
correct.
In 2 different meetings, so I think we might want to think about fine tuning some things, so it's good that you're asking this, and if we set aside $750 for capital, to me, it looks like while the 250 was what people, that was the max they could ask for, the board seemed to want to reduce that to do more, so it might not, I think that if having one grant be possible to get 1/3 of the money that we have in the pot, I just don't see us being capable of saying no to that many people, to be probably too blunt, but I just, that might be too high. So we also want to be mindful that a lot of work goes into these applications, so it's got to be worth their while to participate. A lot of time for the staff to try to find ways to raise money, and then they come here, and so it's an involved process. So trying to have, they want to get their money, so the city's eager to figure out what they can do with it. So I totally get that. We shouldn't try to create a process that makes them come back more times for the same thing. So I would encourage us to try to come up with a way to have the staff work out what the money's going to go towards, and then present that to the board. But we shouldn't. It would be terrible if we had 10 people coming to that meeting to clarify their grants or something, and that may be self-inflicted on us by splitting pie up so much. But I just I think it's right to ask what can you do for 13% of what you asked us for, and so look forward to hearing about that. But this is the first time we've split it into 2 meetings. I will say for myself, since we're giving feedback, I don't know if this is the right time.
Sure.
This reader is really hard for me to use. So I would prefer PDFs of all the applicants so that we could go through and print them out on our own, or read them on that big monitor, so I don't have to wear glasses and they can look at it. So I think going forward, that would be super helpful for me. But I thought it was, it gets better every time. So.
Madam Chair, just wanted to make a comment, what Director Potter just said. I'm somebody who I think thinks about this in maybe an older school way. I would much rather have the board members get an overnight or expedited delivery of paper packets of all the applications, and you can take your time and you can mark them up. Because I agree, I don't think you're gonna be successful on a little iPad or something trying to digest everything this is, and it's really unfair to the staff and to the applicants if you're not fully taking in what these people are asking us for. And the other thing is, I'm just gonna piggyback a little bit on what Bill said is after, I think it was the last grants round, while the board has the prerogative to do whatever it wants, I think what we were erring toward in terms of best practice is to not give partial grants. Because it's just too hard on the applicants. They put a lot of thought into what it will take from everything from materials to staffing to then try and make a project work on 50% funding. So I don't know if there's a way that staff can help us with some best practices in the next guidelines, like if you are going to shrink up somebody's budget, that it's only going to be shrunk by a very small amount. And if you're going to go as low as 13% to an applicant, don't even fund them. Pick the projects that you're going to fund that you can really get behind, because I don't see how you spend 25,000 when you were planning on spending almost 200,000, and it's a waste of our staff's time and their time to try and say, hey, what are you going to give us for $25,000? So that would be my advice going forward.
That the same as saying it's all or none, so we just don't like.
I think where we've come and we've worked hard at this, the staff is making a really strong recommendation, and I wasn't at the meeting either. And so it's the board's prerogative to pick the city of San Jose's Lake Cunningham project for whatever reasons you felt like it was a strong project. And then maybe that bumps another staff recommendation out. But to do it that way rather than to start slicing off money off other projects. So, and it's also your prerogative to say, and you did, staff, you made a recommendation for 750,000 and we're gonna go for 900,000. And we as board members recognize that means there'll be $200,000 less next time, and that's on us. That's okay too. That's your prerogative. But I think just in terms of the project selection, in all fairness to the process, to staff, to the applicants, to have some best practices that we stay as close to the original request that the applicants put in.
Through the chair, could I add a couple things, or maybe partly a suggestion based on the conversation tonight? I think for next time, Jack and I have already talked with a bunch of ideas of ways to kind of handle a little differently, put different information in the guidelines. We have had multiple award meetings in the past. We used to call it small versus large, so it wasn't capital versus program. But one thing, they're pretty far apart, and that's one of the things we're looking at is literally scheduling. Let's the capital so many months after the program that it's not as fresh, the process isn't as fresh. But I started all this with the main point that I've now forgotten because I got so the fact that we're gonna wrap that up.
Do we want to clarify our next steps, or is that something?
I'm sure we could do that. So next steps, Jackie mentioned, we are going to be surveying the applicants, asking them a lot of questions like this. How did this work? The process, the meetings and so on. We'll be talking to all the staff reviewers. We're hearing from you tonight. We'll be back. There'll be more chances. Anytime in between, if you have ideas, we love to hear them and start working toward that next cycle, especially as we work through the finances, knowing how much we have available affects what the guidelines will look like. But this is all really helpful feedback to know, how we can improve things.
And through the chair, I guess I would refer to our legal counsel on, because this is an informational item, the how we proceed forward. It sounds to me, my understanding is that some of the board of directors really like the idea of the 13% and the 20%, these smaller awards, maybe us working with the grantees to see what seems realistic for this project. And then once we have that information to come back to the board for approval. Does that sound?
I think that's right. And I
Okay.
think that's.
Okay.
That's okay.
Approval or information?
Consent item?
Well,
Yeah.
I think, well, I'll say, where it's a difficult situation, right? Because we didn't have any protocols in place and the board has already made a decision and awarded the money. So I think what might suggest in this particular instance is the staff will work with the applicants to come up with something that I think staff can recommend, and then just say, come back to your board and simply say, this is what we recommend based on our interactions with the applicant, and it can be even on consent if you like, or just as an informational item. But I think, in all honesty, I think for staff's own sake, they just want to feel comfortable that what they're bringing to you, you're okay with, because they just don't want to, completely change. You've awarded money, they don't want to completely change a project, and make sure you're still okay with it.
In our, excuse me, in our ranking scoring, do we give nonprofits more points than we would an agency? Because I think most of at the meeting, Andrea, the school district said we can do it with less. Debbie or San Jose said they could do it for less. So, and I think in my experience, we see that more, that there are more pots for the public agencies to reach into than there are nonprofits. So maybe we want to consider a ranking process that would take some of that into consideration. Not tonight, but just.
And piggyback on that, the 20% funds are only eligible for the local governments, the cities, and not for nonprofits. This is my understanding. So that is a good point that you raised, Garnett, because they have other avenues. That's not a huge pot, but it is another pot for them. The school district wouldn't really fit in that, but for cities and county, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think Mike has a really good question or the comments. I'm agree with that. So usually 25% funding, 20% funding we are already giving to cities, right? So might we in this process, we has to be exclude those kind of agencies. So which they already benefit 20% funding. So then might be it's much easier. We can just give more money to the nonprofit organizations. That's how I'm thinking.
Through the chair, can I do a quick response? We can certainly look into it and talk to legal counsel. One question though, the Measure Q expenditure plan specifically calls out our local governments as one of the entities that this grant program is for. So we'd have to look carefully at that before we make those changes, though I understand where you're going.
Maybe because I know, you had a lot of information in the packet about what if you got partial funding, but a lot of it was, well, we would work with it. Maybe we could, if we have the written packets, so everyone is aware of what is said, but maybe also there's some specific questions we can ask, like if you got 80% funding, could you continue with the project? And, something, so we would have more information, and we may not want to cut funding at all, but it sounds like maybe in that 80-90% range, if the grantee gives us permission, we might be able to do that.
I think that questions we already ask each participant or applicants on the board meeting. So are you guys taking whatever the money we give it to them? So they are agreed to say yes. But 30% is not actually it's very less, but usually we ask that question to all applicants, whoever is present on that time, if you can look at that board meeting.
Through the chair, and we asked that as part of the application that was new this year, in case, you know, the board wanted to have that extra information. I like some of the ideas, building on what Director Alexander was saying, that in future we could have thresholds, we could ask for a range of dollar amounts, you know, we could rethink that question so the board had more information. But just also to reiterate, something that Andrea was saying, in general, for the grantees, it is best practice for them to get whatever the amount they asked for or something close to it. Because like when I'm in their shoes and we're requesting money and they ask us, can you accept less? Of course, we say yes, and we'll, you know, adjust it this way or the other way, but it can be very difficult to make those adjustments depending on the project.
And I'll note that, you know, in those situations that Megan, that we're in, we're still committed to doing the project that we proposed. So it's not, we're not in a situation where we're having to change or can even change the project. And that's another avenue for this board to give direction on, which is, well, we only gave you 13%. So if you can't do the project with that, then the project, we're not funding except the project that was before you. And that's sort of the rub for staff is, you know, you accrued funding for a specific project and the applicant's saying, well, our project's got to change. So, and that's where we are. So, you know, and tough love could be the other option. I'm saying you have to do that. I'm just saying that's the good option.
So through the chair, if I heard correctly, it sounds like we can, you know, Jackie in particular will continue working with the grantees, especially our city forest and the city of San Jose applicants. Bring it back to the board as possibly a consent item or an informational item at a future board meeting as soon as possible, with the timeline dependent on the grantee. The others, if this sounds acceptable, we can continue with them. Probably they're going to be close enough to their original project that it won't be as difficult, but if we run into any hiccups where we would like that those we could also add in at the same time.
Sounds very reasonable to me. Thank you for working with us on this.
Great. Thank you so much. Shall I move on? I have a little bit more. All right, we've already touched on some of these things, but I just wanted to review the logistics and we've already been talking about it. So this is great. So in your packet, it had the guidelines, the application list, the recommendations, where they're located, as well as summaries, as well as the recommendations. This is an example from the Capitol. And then 3 weeks before the meeting, I sent out the clerk sent out the application materials, which some of them are hundreds of pages long, and we are going to work through what that might look like. But it sounds like we're open to more suggestions for future packet materials. We've also heard the suggestion of physically printing and mailing the applications or something like the application packet. Again, if they have 200 pages of additional PDFs, maybe you don't want to see that, but it sounds like something along those lines with a little bit more information in your actual packet and maybe printed. But at this time, I'd also be happy to take other suggestions, things you'd like to see in the packet or see it in a different format. Colors, pictures, I can get crafty. I'm happy to hear suggestions on that.
Thank you. Any more questions or comments? Well, I did wonder, maybe when we're talking to the potential grantees, I think I would probably have a tendency, if it's $250,000, I would come up with $250,000, but maybe something in the conversation, or maybe we just lower the limit, but say our board seems to like to, you know, give to a number of different agencies. So if you have a project that's less than the maximum amount, you might be more likely to get it fully funded.
Shall I move on? Okay, great. Well, this just kind of summarizes some of the questions about the general feedback. So one thing I was going to ask is, it sounds like the board of directors likes to award more projects. And if that's the case, and if we don't have lots and lots of extra money, maybe that means a smaller range of the amount. So we'll be looking at that. Of course, we don't know what the funding total allocation will look like yet, but we'll talk about that. Another question that we'll look at either now or in the future is about match. Again, I want to remind everyone about the journey that we got to with match, particularly was around our goals with JEDIA. Many of these nonprofits and some of the schools, they really do struggle with getting funding in general, and match it can be a burden for some of these smaller organizations. So we were really proud to implement this no match requirement for small organizations. So that's something that we might want to look at. It did seem to be a topic at the awards about what other funding is there available. So that's something that staff would like recommendations on in the future, of kind of how to balance that equity versus investment question. Also happy to take feedback on just the general timeline of the process, the review process. Like Megan mentioned, there was kind of a long period of time between May 18th and July 20th. So maybe a shortened time period between awards. And then again, the board packet materials, board of director processes. So at this time, happy to take any other feedback, or we can do it later too.
I did have one, I planned out, well, before we heard about the meetings for a third Thursday event that I went to. And so couldn't change that. So maybe working to consolidate, and I know we've got a lot of stuff on our board meetings, but we sometimes cancel them too. So trying to figure out when, if we can do it on a regular night, if that's possible, or try to keep it consistent with our normal meetings.
Through the chair, just to respond, that works well for us. We did it this way this year, in part from feedback from the board, although it must have been someone else, even different things that people were juggling. And that was that if there are other things on the agenda, that meeting got very long. And so that was the reason these were pulled out as special meetings, so that it could have one topic to focus on, and not as much business. But we're open to either way, whatever the board would like.
Other questions and comments from the board? I think that's the end of your presentation.
Yes.
Thank you. And thank you
Thank you
all
very much.
again I thought it was a great process, except for this glitch that we created. But thank you. Do we have any members of the public who would like to speak?
Thank you very much.
Okay, so I think this was just informational. So we'll move on to the next topic, which is authorize the general manager or assistant general manager to negotiate with property owner representative Kabila Incorporated for assessors parcel numbers 841-40-009, 010, 011. I think it continues. And I can't see who is speaking to that.
Good evening, directors, and with the Palmerville Property Program Manager. There is no presentation associated with this item. It is as shown on the agenda.
Move approval.
Second.
Does the board have any questions? Are there any members of the public who wish to comment? Okay, can you please call the vote?
Director Kenneth,
Yes.
Director Farmer,
Yes.
Director Annabelle,
Yes.
Director Alexander,
Yes.
Director Potter, Director Gill.
Yes.
Motion's passed.
Um. The next is the informational reports. First is the general manager report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Actually, I'd like to start first with the leadership team and just maybe start down the line with Lucas and then Mark.
Through the chair. So.
Did you want to take the CAC first? Is that what you're
Sorry,
looking at?
I missed that.
Okay.
The Citizens Advisory Committee report. And you to skip over it and go directly to the informational report. Do you want us to come back to you or? No, or you just don't have a report for the CAC. Okay, okay, so we don't have a report, so we'll move to the general manager report and the staff report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We're going to start with Planning Manager Lucas Shellhammer.
Right, thank you, Andrea. Beginning with Coyote Valley Open Space Preserve, our 30-day public notice for the filing of our environmental documents, CEQA environmental documents, will be going out, the 30-day notice on Monday. Big milestone for the project that will, following the 30-day public comment period, be coming to the board. We're also simultaneously continuing to seek federal funding for the project's construction. It's currently making its way through the House Subcommittee on Transportation, Housing and Urban Development. The Rancho Piñata Yagas Bridge project will be beginning construction week after next. We had our kickoff meeting last week. So another major milestone. The overflow lot at the preserve will be a portion of that will be used for construction. So that will be closed during the week. We were planning on using it for some special events that we're having out there. And a portion that won't be used for staging. But overall, the impact to the preserve and users there should be fairly minor while we're under construction through the fall. And then Coyote Ridge, few more weeks and we'll be opening up. I'm sure you've all seen the email that Charlotte sent out. And if you haven't, the Tuesday, October 15th will be the public announcement of the opening of the preserve. We're having a barrier ridge trail dedication event on August 30th, which is a private event with press. And then August 31st, we will be opening the preserve up for normal public access. And Charlotte sent out in her email, if you haven't seen it, the Know Before You Go packet, which is great. Talks through kind of the whole our current operational plan beginning on day one through the different months, the different types of access. So take a look at that as well as some information on the brochure and trail map. And then also planning for that October 14th and a Big Bang community day out there. So yeah, unless there's any question. Oh, Nick, not to totally put you on the spot. Is there anything on CD Camp? Coyote Valley Conservation Areas Master Plan you'd like to highlight? I'm sorry.
Sure, Lucas.
While you're here.
Through the chair. We are in the middle of our conditions phase still, doing lots of site assessments on the property. We're doing preserved user surveys at Coyote Valley Open Space Preserve to hear what folks are experiencing out there today, what they might like to see in Coyote Valley in the future. We are doing lots of wildlife surveys. We just got a report back from one of our consultants. They observed 31 different species of birds in winter in Laguna Seca, so good to know what's out there. And we're going to be compiling all of that into a report in the fall. will serve as the foundation for the next phase of work with planning. So looking forward to that, sharing that all with you, and we have that report in our hands.
Thank you. That's great.
Yeah, good evening, directors. I hope you've been watching the emails come in about the media attention we've been getting. We've been receiving quite a bit lately. And hopefully you all saw the Open Road episode that aired at the end of July. We received some comments from some of you, of course, and then from others too, with a wonderful piece that really describes the heart and passion that staff, board, and CAC all really have for the work that we do here at the agency. So more to come on that front, but I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening, Aaron Aber, Natural Resources Manager. I'll start with some good news. I'm proud to say with Valley Habitat Agency, we've broken ground on a small restoration project in our Pajaro River Agricultural Preserve. We have a great farming tenant there who's growing green beans, but kind of along the creek side there with VHA and our partners at Point Blue, we're doing some riparian restoration. And as the board knows, there's been significant flooding in the community of Pajaro far downstream. So it's a little bit of land and it's a little bit of project, but it's a great thing to do. I'll also share that staff is currently reviewing a draft of a memorandum of understanding from the High-Speed Rail Authority that essentially looks to memorialize some of our hard-fought negotiations to include wildlife connectivity in their big plans. As you may know, they're still not funded in this segment, so who knows what will happen when, but getting this in writing is a good step towards, making sure that these sort of connectivity features are being honored by that commitment. And as the board knows, we're going ahead with our partners at Post at Monterey Road. So that very much intersects their future work in that area. So all good news. And then I'll also share with the board something you might have seen as you've been driving through Coyote Valley, but on the Chappelle Orchard, it's a walnut orchard kind of right before you take a right into Coyote Valley Open Space Preserve right on Palm Avenue. Unfortunately, the walnut trees there sustained quite a bit of damage this year, both due to rainfall on the surface and kind of the clayey soils, but also from really high groundwater. I think I looked at a monitoring well and it's 3 feet below the surface there. So as you can imagine, that's pretty well in the root zone. So approximately 80 to 90% of the trees in the orchard have suffered. The tenant is looking to get out of that lease. It's not a very profitable business. I understand he put them in when walnuts were at $2.50 a pound and now they're 50 cents a pound, and then dealing with this kind of thing. So we're figuring out what to do in the short term. There's lots of this or that on the property to manage, and then in the long term, I'll say that we're working with good folks through the CB process and the agricultural team to figure out what's an appropriate long-term use. Certainly not orchard. I think we've established that, but it's got great wells and great access, a little farm center. So more to come on that.
Thanks, Sarah. And actually, we're going to throw it to Derek Newman, who's participating virtually. If you can take him in, Caroline, thank you.
Good evening, directors. Derek Newman here, Field Operations Manager for the Authority. Just wanted to give a little quick update on our staff receiving really great praise from Mid-Peninsula Open Space District. Several of their staff, 10 in total, came out to visit Mayano Yakima, Coyote Ridge, and took a tour with Andres Camposano and Patrick Stevenson to show them the trail building that they had done, along with all the other things that we've been working on to get Mayano Yakima open to the public. It was the whole day. It took a whole day for them, and they also ended up getting a really great praise from the staff there. Mid-Penn staff wanted to come out to take a look because they're going to be building a trail soon on their properties too. And we're really interested in what our team had done for building the trail by hand, which is something that we generally don't do. We use machines, but in the instance of over at Coyote Ridge, we did it all by hand simply because of the serpentine soil. and not wanting to use equipment out there. So just want to give a quick update on that. With that, my report is complete.
Thank you, Derek. 2 quick points. Lee Rauscher, Assistant General Manager, good evening, directors. First and foremost, we want to let you know that we'll be canceling the meeting on August 24th. So you can take that off your calendars and free up your time. And then just another note is with Justina's and soon to be Elisa's help, as Justina will be going out on leave mid next month. So you've got one more board meeting with her. The leadership team is modeling our financial forecast over the next 9 years, taking a close look at expenses. The leadership team is also fleshing out several objectives that we believe will move the agency closer to achieving our goals of financial sustainability, succession planning, and resiliency. And as those objectives start to gel, we'll be involving staff in fleshing them out, and then we look forward to bringing some sort of an update to the board probably later in the year.
Thanks, Lee. Staff had great reports out tonight. The only thing I wanted to add is I just really wanted to give kudos to our staff, and particularly Kat Hill, for organizing the Open Space Authority presence at 7 different national nights out across our jurisdiction. For those board members who were able to attend one of those, thank you very much. We had good staff turnout, good volunteer turnout, and great interaction with the public. I was out at the 7 Trees Community Center, and just a lot of happy people coming up, a lot of kids interacting with Assemblymember Ashkara came by our booth. So we hope to do more of those kinds of things in each of your jurisdictions and districts. And as you know, Espina Farms is coming up fast in the fall. And we've got staff and volunteers assigned to manning our tables out at Espina Farms, who would love to have you out there. And can one of you remind me, we have a special UNM and CAC meeting, do we not, out at Espina Farms? You know what the date of that is?
September 28th, I believe at 2 to 4 p.m.
All right, awesome. See you there. If you can make it. Back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you all for great reports. So I think that covers Assistant General Manager staff report. Legal counsel report?
No report, Madam Chair.
Okay. Board member reports.
I just want to be request the staff if they can make every month update for all the board members, not only me, but especially I really need that, because when I would want to go any community meeting, we need whatever is activities the Open Space Authority completed and it's done. So then in that way we can update the community. So it's a kindly request actually. At the end of might be last day of the month is okay, because all the meetings start the first week each month. Other than that, I usually attend last week actually. Last week district roundtable meeting, and Mike Potter gave a really good presentation from the water district, and it was really, yeah, believe or not, it was a lot of questions the people asked, and he did a great job. Thank you.
Thank you. That was our speakers bureau, which used to be about the drought, and now it's about general stuff. I wanted to say I did go to the National Night Out at Emma Krush Park. I had volunteers there. It was great, and there were lots of people. And the volunteers were surprised how many people there were, and I went to a couple other National Night Outs with my shirt on too in my district. So that was really, I think, a great idea. I'd love to see that happen again. I think that went well. That was it.
Back up a second to CAC. One of the things that was brought up at the last meeting was the natural working lands state funding that came through. 54 million, of which San Jose is supposed to get 52 million. So I'm going to assume that has something to do with hopefully Coyote Valley and either that getting money that have already committed. The other thing was that Post and OSA had done a presentation on July 6th to the state, right? Regarding Coyote Valley and the wildlife. Mark, I think.
Yeah, through the chair, if I can respond just quickly. Yeah, the presentation was about the Wildlife Corridor Working Group Summit on July 6th and mentioned the 52 million that had already been invested by the state of California in Coyote Valley.
I think it's right. And then the other thing that's important is that there's a vacancy in the at-large position on the CAC, and there's a vacancy in District 6. So, any ideas or thoughts, new folks to bring in? There's opportunity.
Quick question, were there, I think it was your seat that was the last one that was
Allison?
filled?
Yeah, Allison.
Were there additional people who were interested who would then be eligible for an at-large seat?
Yes, and I think I let her know
Okay.
at the time, but I can reach out again.
Okay.
He's part of the legal voters.
Yeah.
Through the chair. Through the chair, if I remember correctly, that was Linda Marquez, and we actually appointed her to the expenditure plan oversight committee.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to give a quick update of our efforts on Sierra Road for July 4th. It was a very quiet night. It was amazing. And very few, yeah. Like, yeah. We had very few people that got by the roadblocks to even get up to us. So we didn't have to go out and talk to everybody that wanted to show up and park in the road and all that. So very successful this time.
Great.
So, where do I start? I'll start at August. I attended, or in July, I attended the dinner for the Farm Bureau in the orchard. It was a very unique dinner. First of all, you start out in an orchard, a working orchard, and then we ended up in the barn, and they had dancing and music and all kinds of stuff. And the food was good. Then on National Night Out, I attended two of them. The one in South San Jose, and it was nice, well attended, sort of. It was 150, 200 people at any given time that I was there. And then I went to the one in Morgan Hill, and I'm not exaggerating, there were at least 5,000 people at that one. They had fire trucks, they had police stuff, and the sheriffs. They had the DA had a booth there, which right across from the police. It was kind of goofy.
One-stop shopping.
But the Morgan Hill, the Panthers, the football team, who just won their championship, they had a booth there because they're based now in Morgan Hill. And it was really well attended. And my wife's dance team danced. So it was fun to watch. And then on last Saturday, Megan and I attended the ribbon cutting for the new trail. And it was, did you get those pictures? I never saw them. The ones you took? Yeah.
I do have some pictures I can share with you.
Yeah, nice to see. And then one of the results of that was the invitation to all of you to view the new tunnel at at Anderson Dam, which is, I got a glimpse of it already, but I'm gonna go back and see it. It's, I'm not exaggerating when you can drive a truck through it. It would be a great big truck and you would still have plenty of room. And then last night I was at Svedal, which is right there at the US County Park, right at the beginning, and they had it was just one of their midsummer dinners. There was some local fire people there, and it's always nice to visit them. So that's my story. Other than that, I didn't do a lot.
Thank you. I think you've been busy. Okay, anything else? I think we'll now convene to closed session. Is there an announcement regarding the items to be discussed in closed session?
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. There are 3 items. They're all real conference with real property negotiator. The details are listed on the agenda.
Thank you.